Good morning. Welcome to our regularly scheduled meeting of Committee of the Whole. My name is Elizabeth Glidden, and I am the chair of this committee. And we are joined today by council members Cano, Bender, Andrew Johnson, Yang, Quincy, Warsami, and Fry, and we are a quorum of the committee and able to do business. We have one discussion item listed on our agenda today. It is regarding information technology outsourcing contracts, and this is from it probably should have been listed under the IT subcommittee. And so I will be in a moment giving the chair to Councilmember Andrew Johnson. But I would like to add an item to the agenda. It is on your place in front of you. It is a resolution authored by myself and Councilmember Warsami, and it is relating to remittances to Somalia. So I will move to add that as item number 2 under discussion. All in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that is added. So we are now to our first item. If folks want to start coming forward, and I will turn the chair over to Councilmember Andrew Johnson for the IT subcommittee.
Thank you, Council Vice President Glidden. Today we have one item before us, the information technology outsourcing contracts, and we are joined by our Chief Information Officer of the city, Otto Dahl, to present.
Thank you, Chair Johnson, committee members, good morning. And I'd like to go through and clarify the request for contract action that you have before you this morning. To kind of just set everyone into sort of the history we've had with outsourcing in the city. We started outsourcing through a contract with Unisys, who's our current provider. We signed that contract back in December of 2002 for services that started in 2003. We renegotiated that contract in 2007. We got some cost reductions. We also added some services, things like the PC and server refresh capability that we use today, disaster recovery services, etc. The contract was also renegotiated at the end of 2010 and extended for, or set for 5 years. We also had a reduction of costs then. For those of you around, you might remember that was a year that we didn't refresh the PCs. And we did some other things to reduce our costs. We did add some changes, such as the IMAC process, some security, and some change management as well. Also back at that time frame, the council requested that we ensure that the next time around we go out on the street and recompete the contract, which is what we're bringing forward today. We in IT established a 4-phased approach to tackling this challenge. And we started actually back in 2013. I came on board in 2011 and started to think through how we would approach looking at really all aspects of outsourcing. And so initially what we wanted to do was to determine what will be our strategy for outsourcing. And so we established some governance through a steering committee made up of council members, the chief financial officer, the city coordinator, and myself, as well as a working group of department heads and myself. And through that mechanism and working with the IT staff, we established some sourcing principles and strategies and key objectives, which I'll be going over shortly, as well as ultimately the sort of delivery model that we were looking to put in place for the city. We sought also outside support and guidance from IT research firms. We also talked to various entities in the private sector and also state and local governments. We're blessed with a lot of large IT shops in the area, as well as connections that I and others had across the country. And then we also hired Pillsbury Global Sourcing Services, And they have been with us every step of the way from those early discussions through the RFP creation and ultimately into negotiations. In phase 2, then we started to actually physically issue the RFP, which we did in February of 2014, and we got 18 proposals. We ultimately down selected that to 5 frontrunners, and then ultimately brought that down to 2 vendors that we brought into negotiations with the city, and then ultimately came to a selection, which I'll go over here in a moment. Phase 3 was that negotiation process. We did a lot of due diligence and a very extensive process to ensure that we truly get a model outsourcing approach. And then finally, phase 4 will be transition. Obviously, we're going to have to move, as you're going to see in a moment, from our current outsourcer to a new provider or set of providers, and that is going to take the remainder of 2015 to accomplish. As I was pointing out, this really has been a 2 to 3 year process ultimately to accomplish this recompete, and we have designed the solution so that in the future we don't have sort of this all or nothing approach, which takes an enormous amount of time and effort and ultimate money for the city to look at its outsourcing arrangements. And I will talk at times about the details of that, but take note that we spent a lot of time and effort to do this right, but we do want to position the city so that we can take smaller pieces so that we can react quicker, and also that the potential impact of transition costs and just overall timing can be shortened significantly. The sourcing principles that came out of us working with departments as well as the steering committee and others was kind of very interesting in the sense that there was a lot of different opinions and approaches, but there really were some general themes that came out. People did not want us to go offshore with these types of services, which is used by some that outsource in the world. And most definitely, we have some requirements to keep our data onshore. And also, it was very important for us to ensure that we had 24/7 coverage, not just for public service entities in the city like police and fire, but also, when that water main breaks in the middle of the night, Public Works is going to be out there and they need their information systems in support of their efforts. People wanted high availability, of course, of their systems. Information systems often serve departments as their systems of record. And so it's really important that that information is available to them at all times. And obviously departments, as we all want IT to move with the times, to be able to take advantage of and adopt new technology as it comes into the marketplace. And then ultimately to be flexible, because not only is technology changing at a rapid pace, but our organization, our city government changes, maybe not at the same pace, but most definitely it does change over the years. And so people really wanted to ensure that we were creating a flexible solution that would allow us to adjust as needed for whatever purposes the city needs IT for. Key sourcing objectives, as you can see from this list, we wanted to ensure that we got maximum value for our outsourcing dollars. We wanted to be retaining control over outsourcing options. Things like our ability to have low barriers to exit from any given provider, our ability to adjust should our financial status change. We learned a lot through the recession, and we wanted to position ourselves so that we could better weather those types of situations that come upon the city. as well as ultimately providing quality IT services. And as I mentioned, not only today, but in the future as things change. And so there were a number of objectives that we kept as common themes. We built that in through the RFP process and ultimately selected a solution that we believe meets these objectives. People always wonder sort of the evaluation process. We did a very detailed and evolved evaluation process. Unfortunately, in the IT world, there are many, many details. In a lot of cases, the devil's in the details. And so these are actually categories of criteria, of which there were many pieces under each of these that we turned around and actually did an evaluation process followed by an extensive due diligence set of activities to ensure that we were, number one, getting the information correct, as well as interpreting it. And that's where we also brought in experts like Pillsbury to help us interpret and understand exactly what vendors were proposing in their actual submissions to the city. Now, today, the upper part of this chart is what we have today. We really have four basic areas that make up the IT outsourcing service. And the first being computing services, and think of that as the data center that houses our computers that run the city's information systems and applications. The second is networking services, and this, of course, is what allows us to get to the internet and to connect with one another, whether we're in any of the 76 plus facilities across the city. As part of that, there is a need for the actual communication lines between buildings and whether it's wireless communications or otherwise. That piece of communications lines is actually through a different contracting vehicle. CenturyLink is our current provider. We recompeted that business about a year to 18 months ago, and CenturyLink won that business. And so that's not changing, and that doesn't change relative to this. But the various other networking services where we monitor the network, where we do changes physically to the various network electronics that connect to those communication lines, that is part of this outsourcing arrangement. Third area is security services. I'm sure, as you're all aware, a number of instances have come up in the press in the last couple of years, some of which are quite close to home, of instances where bad actors have been able to breach people's information systems. And so that's an area that we wanted to ultimately up the bar in the capabilities and defenses that we put in place. Because unfortunately, that is really a war that we have to wage against those bad actors. And then the final area is when you pick up the phone to get service or to get a problem resolved or to understand what your options are, when you call that service desk or the help desk, if you will, they may invoke the desk side support folks that you see come around installing equipment or fixing things. And so that's the final and fourth area. What we are proposing today is to contract with OneNeck, which is a company that is based out of Arizona. Actually, OneNeck itself originally was a local company based out of Eden Prairie called Visi Incorporated. The OneNeck is actually a wholly owned subsidiary of yet another company, TDS Incorporated, out of Chicago. And as you're probably quite familiar, the private industry often does acquisitions, and IT, most definitely, that is not a foreign concept. It's done quite often as companies consume others, and so that is the case here. But we're dealing with OneNeck and their local representation, and also, as you'll find out, their data center actually exists in Eden Prairie in the Twin Cities arena. It is a consortium. OneNeck has proposed using a company called Solutionary to provide security services. We find this advantageous in a couple of issues. One, obviously the expertise that they bring, being a company that deals solely in the security services arena, and also it's a degree of isolation, or if you will, trying to make sure we don't have the fox guarding the hen house type of scenario going on. And so we value that particular arrangement. We did, through an extensive research and ultimately running really the same sort of process and evaluation and due diligence on the service desk and desktop services arena, we're proposing that that be brought in-house and be manned, and those functions be accommodated by the city Department of IT. Now, there are a number of major reasons why we feel OneNeck and this ultimate solution of that we've proposed be accepted. The first is, what we found was that in today's world, time, of course, costs you, whether it is in our ability to meet some need, sometimes law and regulation that occurs beyond the city's borders, down to ultimately just being able to save time and money by being able to basically provision IT services in a very fast manner. And the solution that was provided gives us the ability to provision technology from days and weeks down to hours. And you know, you often hear about speed to market type concepts in private industry. In ours, it's much the same. And this most definitely, with taking advantage of new technologies and new approaches to provisioning of IT services that's out there, OneNeck brings that to the table for the benefit of the city. Second, as we found their pricing to be extremely competitive with the industry and most definitely with the other proposals that we received, there are a couple of things I would note. First of all, in our current contract, we have a baseline cost structure that we pay to our current provider. That is not the case. This is a true consumption methodology. What resources we consume is what we get charged for. There's always been a lot of consternation by departments over the IMAC fee process, and that will no longer be required in this solution. And then finally, ultimately, as you're going to see later when we go over the financials, we anticipate a 25% annual cost reduction over the existing contract based on this new arrangement with OneNeck and the insourcing. We feel that we got very favorable service levels and a credit methodology with OneNeck. What kind of really struck us was OneNeck's ability to even consider going to 100% in some of the SLAs that the city has, and we have lots of SLAs, as one can quite imagine. That really told us a lot about OneNeck and their ability to understand that, you know, they obviously trust they're going to deliver the goods, if you will, but most definitely some of the
Mr. Dahl?
SLAs were...
We just so some of my colleagues know what SLA is. It's a service level agreement. Yeah,
my apologies. Service level agreements are structured in a way that allow us to gauge and understand if the services that we've asked for are being rendered properly. And a lot of those SLAs were such that literally if one machine went down or 1 hour was missed, then they would miss the SLA. And what we were quite impressed is OneNeck's like, look, if something goes down in our world, we're willing to take that hit, and we're willing to take it in with a financial remedy to the city. We really feel that is a great approach. Also, the earn back sort of methodology that we use back today is no longer in effect, and the city really does have control of the SLAs. Not only did we originally work this through the RFP process, but also we will be able to adjust and modify them over time as our needs change. The second area there on that slide deals with our ability to ensure that we don't get forced into some sort of lock-in with this supplier or this set of suppliers. And we really felt that the termination clauses, of which I've shown 4 on this slide, really give us the ability to get out from underneath whether or not, for some reason, OneNeck can't deliver, or that we have some need based on convenience within the city, or if there is a change in control of OneNeck, that we feel that we need to seek a new supplier or potentially insource ourselves. This is particularly important in the security arena because security is something that has to be integrated. It has to be viewed from an enterprise standpoint, and we must definitely have the ability that if we were to part ways with OneNeck, that we could still stay with Solutionary in our security services if we so deem that to be appropriate. And then finally, of course, one that you typically see in all city contracts, if we don't have the funding, then we have the ability to get out of contractual commitments. And finally, we look to be in a position to truly have flexibility. I mentioned the security aspect. But also because of the scope model approach that we took, which is really laying out, and if you were to look at the charts, they're kind of this multicolored world that indicates what exactly, when it comes to IT processes and responsibilities, what's the responsibility of OneNeck and Solutionary versus what the city is responsible for. And those are built based on the needs within the city, as well as technology needs, and it gives the city the ability to drive standardization of IT where we see that being appropriate. And OneNeck allows, through that scope model process, to drive wherever possible standards that the city would like to see. I think this is a really important aspect of the contract because a lot of times in the outsourcing arena, you end up getting forced to strictly, it's sort of the outsourcer's way or the highway. And this really gives us a lot of flexibility to influence and ultimately get OneNeck to do what we feel technically is viable within some overall constraints of how they structure their technology, but they most definitely showed us that they're very flexible in meeting potentially our IT standard structure and just ultimate IT solutions. And then finally, heaven forbid, but should we have a disaster, it's always good that we can easily get to the Disaster Recovery Center, which for OneNeck is down in Des Moines, Iowa. It's one thing when you're counting the minutes of outage that you don't have to put people on a plane. So we really felt that that was advantageous to their ultimate solution with us. Now, what I'd like to do is delve a little bit more into the insourcing piece. Yep.
All right, never mind. Sorry, we have a question in a bit.
Insourcing. Insourcing was very interesting for us. We actually ran the process just like the IT department was yet another provider issuing a proposal to the city. So we went through the same evaluation criteria, the same due diligence, understanding what the city was proposing, and then ultimately comparing that against other proposals in the area of the service desk and desktop services. What we found was that we really didn't want to be locked into any business model that a outsourcer has, because again, not only does IT change, but in this area, most definitely the organization itself changes. And of course, an outsourcer wants to create a model and sort of turn that crank and do a repeatable process. And for a fee, you can always change that process. And we really feel that we need to really kind of own that client relationship and have that ability to evolve how we deal with employees and with the departments overall, i.e. the clients of IT. We also found that and it's not just because we have a younger generation in our workforce, as is natural progression, but also just in general. With the consumerization of IT, people view how they get IT services and capabilities to help them is more like, I pull out my smartphone and I go to the App Store and I download something. And so we need to be able to structure our service in this area in much the same manner where possible. And so that's exactly what we're proposing is to be accomplished. It's what I kind of call that smartphone app store ease that people are looking for. We want to be in a position to have a pipeline, if you will, a ladder of career within the IT shop itself. One of the things that's kind of hampered us is that because a lot of the lower skilled jobs were with the outsourcer, we didn't have this ability to pull people through the organization over time. And so we really feel that by having these jobs within the city gives us that career ladder for folks. We also want to ensure that we improve our racial equity within the IT department, and obviously that will help the city. So we're working with groups like Creating IT Futures and Genesis Works and MCTC interns and others to help us tap a marketplace out there for these types of positions which have a larger percentage of people of color available in that marketplace looking for this type of work. We also wanted, of course, to be in a position to easily outsource or easily change our outsourcers, and most definitely our ability to sort of orchestrate that through the ability that we would have complete control over our service desk, sort of the hub of keeping track of all activities in IT, really helps us manage that potential change. And then ultimately, and one of the things that probably was, to me, the largest surprise of the whole evaluation was the fact of the very large differential in cost of what proposals came in to do this work versus what we could do within the city. We felt we had some advantage based on our salary structure, but it turned out to be much greater. And digging into it further, what we learned is these areas, particularly the service desk, closely followed by desktop services within the IT outsourcing industry, is the most lucrative part of the outsourcer's set of activities. When you think about going out and spinning up and running some application on a server in a large data center where you have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of computers running, that is a very low margin. Volume is what makes that happen for them. There's tremendous amount of capital that needs to be put into that process. So, when we looked early on in determining our outsourcing strategy, we looked at all 4 areas of the outsourcing arena and really only felt that this area was appropriate to be brought in-house currently with the way technology is. And so, what we saw was a significant cost savings. And when I talk about the financial world, I'll delve into that a little bit more. From a structure standpoint, what we're proposing in the insourcing arena of both these 2 functions is to have a service desk that will have 17 positions in it, or FTEs, and we will be providing 24/7 support, because as we mentioned, that was something that was sought by the organization, by the city government as a whole. We are also proposing to have 13 positions in the desktop side support within the organization, as well as a couple of positions to manage. There's a very involved software system that manages the integration of all IT activities across the city. In the industry, we call that an IT service management system or software. And so we need a couple of people to manage that process. It's also what's going to give us the ability to set up that concept I talked about, where someone can go out and find out what software is available, and through whatever approval process departments have told us they want to do, someone would be able to discover what's available to them and ultimately select it, and hopefully in most instances have the system automatically, electronically update their desktop with that software so they can move forward as they're used to with their smartphone and tablets and other sort of consumerized technology that exists today. And then finally, we're seeking one support position as a contract administrator. This is something we had originally with Unisys contract way back when, in 2003. That position was caught in the layoffs of 2010, and we really believe, obviously with all of the procurement activities and just general oversight and auditing of action with all the different things that go on, that we need a person full-time to manage this arena again. Now, you might wonder, so, what about recruiting and so forth? And so we've been very active over the past 9 months or so in working with various recruiting efforts. In general, we do that at large anyway. But for instance, one initiative that we did was we partnered with CPED, NCR, and HR to bring the Creating IT Futures organization's IT Ready job program into Minneapolis for the first time. And actually that extensive course, very intensive training activity that goes on was kicked off just this week. And so that is, a potential class of folks who will be out looking for the sort of jobs that we are going to have available. And as I mentioned, we're also working with Genesis Works, MCTC, interns, and other programs as well. We plan on starting the hiring here shortly after we get the contract signed and do some first high-level detail on the actual transition plans. We're going to be sort of starting at the top of this organization with those supervisors, working down through experienced and less experienced positions as we go forward in the year. And so we're really going to be kicking off those efforts in March. And we're really looking to get those people on board because, number one, there's a fair amount of training that has to take place, as well as just structuring this. Now, obviously, there's a lot of pieces to this. I have to sink in having space for these people, et cetera, which we've been working on with property services And so that hopefully is all going to come together in sort of the April timeframe, and we'll start to be in a position to actively having these people on staff, as I mentioned. And just a note about savings. Again, as I was mentioning, we have a very wide range of savings that we saw from doing the insourcing in-house. Of the savings that we're going to talk about when we go over the numbers here financially, we're seeing in the insourcing area, we're going to be saving upwards of $2 million just within the insourcing arena, based on the lowest price vendor that had a proposal in this area. And talking about finances, it's on the next page. Now, I want to point out this chart, a couple of things about it. First of all the numbers are in thousands, okay? Sort of in that top section, which represents the expenses, sort of that middle section that starts with new manages services contract down through contingency. The line, that total annual cost of the new model is a summation of those lines. And so, first of all, as you can see, during this year, we're going to be paying Unisys on the existing outsourcing relationship upwards of $13.3 million. We will need to spend, if you will, as a transition set of costs, what we're anticipating to be approximately $9.8 million. For a total annual cost in year one, which is 2015, of $23.2 million. And then in the out years, of course, we're totally on one neck and solution area as well as our insourcing. And you see that we start running in the 10 million plus range over the course of those years. I put in the bottom there a view of the funding source that we make use of within the IT department, which is the Intergovernmental Services Fund. Yes, in the past we've had some challenges with the balance in here, but it is a healthy fund. You can see those amounts. We've built that up. Obviously, the purpose of that fund is for these sorts of efforts where we need a cash infusion to be able to accomplish, in this case, changing our outsourcing strategy and approach and making use of new providers. And we are in a good position to be able to accomplish that. So to finish my talking points this morning, just to summarize, obviously we are seeking approval to go forward with OneNeck contractually for a 5-year contract with 3 one-year extensions that could be renewed for a total contract value to not exceed $22,025,000. We'd also like to continue making use of Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, and Pittman. They have been with us throughout this process. We have been extremely impressed, and we have benefited immensely from their expertise all the way through negotiations on this whole process. And we would like to increase their contract by $642,000 for remaining services during 2015 transition year. We'd also need to transfer some assets that we have currently with Unisys. For instance, those desktop PCs and other technologies that are on across the city, as well as some of our computers that sit back in the Eagan data center of theirs. We will want to transition those to the city and ultimately take control of those. So we need authority, obviously, to do that transfer. That equipment is depreciated, so some of it will be, it's already been, if you will, paid for, but I believe contractually within the current Unisys contract, it's like $1 or something to pick up a device that's been totally depreciated. And so, that there's kind of a set dollar amount that we've determined for that. And then ultimately, in order for us to have the 33 FTEs, as well as associated costs for transitioning, we seek an amendment to the 2015 budget for IT to accomplish that. And so with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. We do have a couple of questions in queue, starting with Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions, and I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and it's pretty exciting for those of you who've been following this on the council for a long time. I've had some issues with the past contract, and I would actually oppose some of the renewals that went forward. So it's good to see this coming forward, and I advocated bringing some in-house, and that's good. I have a couple questions. One of them has to do with the financial information, year one, so the previous slide. If we're switching companies, and this is year one of our new contract, and it looks like OneNet is getting $3.8 million, or if I have that right, why is Unisys still getting so much money?
Chair Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, again, the way some of our contracts, that contract is written, some of our services, it's a baseline cost. We pay that regardless. And so, you can think of this as day one right now, we're 100% under Unisys. And so that's going to start to tail down. There will be some services that we pay for based on, if you will, the assets that we have under their control. And as those move away, we'll be able to pay a little bit less. But we want it to be very conservative in that number. This is the running rate for what normally we would pay them within this year. And so that will drift down a little bit, but it won't be significant based on the way the contractual arrangement is. And so that's part of the challenge, and what we wanted to ensure with this contract is to never position ourselves to be in this all or nothing situation again. Each of those areas I talked about, we can address separately with OneNet in the future, so that we don't get into this position where we potentially have such a large transition cost to moving away.
Do we have kind of a date set then when we will be all done with Unisys and all transferred over to ourselves in one? No?
Yeah. Chair Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, we do. I mean, we are. Our ultimate end date is to have everything move over by December 1st. That gives us a 30-day window in case we miss something. Obviously, we have a hard stop on January 1st. There is a transition schedule that has been sort of penciled out, but until we can really sit down with OneNet and Solutionary and work out all the details, some of that scheduling could change, but it will commence starting later this month if you all approve the contract.
And then my kind of second question area had to do with Solutionary. Mm-hmm. So it looks like we'll have that kind of security services. Well, it's just a little confusing. If we, why don't we have a separate contract with them then? If you're saying if things don't work out with OneNet, we can still preserve this. But it looks like we're just having a contract with OneNet, which I just want to know then, sure. How are we making sure then we have that option should we want to split them up?
Yes. Chair Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, in the RFP, we allowed companies to bid on one or more of each of those four areas. So we had other companies that bid security. Some bid it solely, others bid all or pieces of it. When we compared all the solutions, we felt that the solution that One Neck was proposing, and by the way, they did even propose the area that we decided to insource as well, and obviously we did not choose that solution. And so we have structured this contract where either we can continue to do business with Solutionary should we not work with One Neck in the future, as well as ultimately change out the security services in the future as well. So we decide to do that with somebody else or what have you. But again, it was just based on an evaluation of what they brought to the table versus all the other options that we felt that that was the best solution for the city. It just so happened it was bundled in this consortium approach that One Neck had brought forward to us.
So essentially, One Neck is going to have a contract with Solutionary? And we're going to have a
Yes.
contract with One Neck?
Yes.
But in our contract with One Neck, there's an agreement that we can take Solutionary away from them or whatever. Okay. I appreciate that. I had one more issue in it, just had to do with flexibility, and I don't know whether they're called change orders or adding services. So we had this issue with the previous contract where I think we thought we were getting what we needed for a year or for 5 years, but in the course of the years, we keep coming back asking for more services, so we always ended up paying them more than the actual contract. Do we think we actually are, have we done a better job, or is there some flexibility built within this so that we aren't going to come back with these same new demands on One Neck and then they're going to have new charges imposed on us? Or have we, how are we protecting ourselves a little bit from that? I know it's hard to anticipate what departments are going to want in 3 years, but.
Yes. Chairman Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, good question. One of the processes you referred to is called the IMAC fee, and those will no longer be, all right? So the ability for, a need for a department to move 4 people from here to there, we had this formula for when we charged and how much we charged and so forth, and that is all kind of built into the base of the overall services. There are instances, though, where if we need new server or computer technology to take on a new application, that will be a new asset that One Neck has to manage. And so there is an increase in costs for that. So don't view this strictly as a fixed price contract, because there are some aspects of it based on our growth that we could turn around. Now, we've built in growth factors into that 22 million, so we hope we stay, we should stay within that, assuming there isn't some sort of huge growth that occurs in growth of IT services that are necessary within the city. And so we've tried to anticipate that so that we have as much of a comfort level as possible as to what we feel our spend level is going to be in IT over the next 5 years.
Thanks. And I guess my last thing is about the local Minnesota company idea, because I did notice that One Neck has their main headquarters is in Arizona, I think, but there's something appealing about the idea that we might actually have some people that we could contact and talk to. There always seem to be so many layers between the council and the leadership in the city and Unisys. And I'm wondering if anybody from One Neck is here, for example, today, or is there then a person that we might be able to reach out to, or a staff and discuss things further from the Eden Prairie office?
Sure. Chairman Johnson, Councilmember Gordon, first of all, yes, as I was mentioning, companies in the private industry, they get bought and sold and what have you. One Neck, originally, the piece that was here in Eden Prairie was a company by the name of Visi Incorporated, VISI. That was a homegrown Minnesota company in the Twin Cities area. Yeah, they go get acquired by this OneNet company. They're based in Arizona. Guess what? OneNet goes and gets acquired by a company called TDS Incorporated out of Chicago. It's a company that's been in business since '69, deals in telecommunications and data services. I believe they're a $4.9 billion company. And so ownership has a tendency to move in private industry, and this is not unusual. We see this in a lot of instances. There are actually three representatives from OneNet here, and we can get you contact information when this is all said and done.
All right, well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and glad to see you here.
Councilmember Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for all your work. Thank you, Mr. Dahl. I know you've been working on this for a couple of years right now. Just a couple quick questions. The first is in regard to the slide that you presently have up. Those total projected annual costs at the bottom, going from 23 million to 10 million, et cetera, that includes, I think this is the case, I just want to be clear, that includes the entirety of the cost for OneNet plus any insourcing additional costs, plus anything else that could possibly be there?
Chairman Johnson, Councilmember Fry, yes. Pillsbury dollars are in there. They're under contingency. I tried to list all the pieces that are included, but this is everything.
Great. Second question, I know that Chair Johnson asked a question indirectly through me on the last one about depreciation. So I think you mentioned it during your slide, during your presentation, but the depreciation is accounted for when the computers are turned over.
Yes.
And then once those computers are dead, like we need to refresh or replace, do we pay for those?
Chair Johnson, Councilmember Fry, pay for it in the sense of, I want to make sure I understand your question. I mean, when
Well, I guess my assumption is that if we're buying the computers over now at the end of the Unisys contract, my assumption is that the computers were presently in their hands, and if they're presently in their hands, it probably means that they paid for them to begin with. So my question is, if our computers break in the future, is that cost that or they just need to be replaced because they're old and crummy, is that a cost that we incur that we didn't used to incur?
Chairman Johnson, Councilmember Fry, we actually pay for those now. I mean, when we refresh technology today, that ultimately gets paid for by the city through mechanisms in the Unisys contract today. So when we spin up, whether it's a new server or whether or not it's replacing somebody's desktop, there are mechanisms, refresh mechanisms within the city that pays for all that through Unisys, even though Unisys holds the access, and we make use of their buying contracts for things like the Dell PCs that we buy and the server technology and the storage technology that we make use of. So we've always been paying for that through that mechanism, and then in the future we will continue to pay through that. And so that's built into these costs as well.
So will we have ownership then in the future?
Yes.
Whereas we didn't have ownership in the past?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions. Mr. Dahl, to piggyback on Councilmember Fry's question, let's just say, when we transfer ownership back or to us as a city and we put our computers to pasture, Unisys had a great program, doing computer giveaways to low-income communities. And I mean, is that something that we're thinking down the line?
Yeah, Chair Johnson, Councilmember Yang, most definitely. We use PCs for People, is that nonprofit organization that we currently use through Unisys, and we'd like to continue that approach in the future. Okay, and
I'm thinking about the transition costs, which are, high, $10 million, and I'm looking at Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, and Pittman. And for $642,000 up until the end of the year, Could you explain to us exactly what they do? I mean, just and why it's a needed service, and why maybe folks like OneNet couldn't do that.
Right, right. Chairman Johnson, Councilmember Yang, there's a couple of key aspects that Pillsbury brings to the table. First of all, they have helped other companies do this transition from one firm to another. So it's more than just we feel having an independent person helping and managing the overall transition process as a project manager for the whole of the effort. Number one, gives us the needed manpower to accomplish that function, as well as in-depth experience of having done this many, many, many times before. The second thing is that Pillsbury does this for a living, and they're well known in the outsourcing community. So for firms like Unisys, they most definitely want to have a good transition out. They don't want a bad reputation. And we want to ensure that we've got someone that plays in that outsourcing arena there as we negotiate all the different pieces we're going to have to work through in order to ultimately do this transition going forward. So we think it's really critical to have somebody like Pillsbury, of which OneNet is just another competitor like Unisys, and really can't provide that at all for us. It's not to say that OneNet couldn't do a transition. Yes, they do them because that's their business. But this is more of being able to orchestrate not only OneNet's activities, but ours and Unisys as we move all this through. And then a whole series of other potential vendors that get involved. Like when you're switching over networking equipment, we got to work with CenturyLink on making that happen, et cetera. So there's a whole slew of activities that are going to take place to allow us to physically do this. And so that's why we're seeking that expertise of someone who does this for a living, helping companies move between providers in their outsourcing strategies.
And, in your presentation, you mentioned some favorable termination clauses, and to get to that, just for the sake of argument, I mean, if it turns bad with OneNet and we have transition costs, I mean, do you anticipate these transition costs being this high, about in the $10 million range? Again.
Chairman Johnson, Councilmember Yang, good question. We have some protections against if we've got to move to another provider because it doesn't work out. The transition costs, if we end up doing the whole thing all over again, then yeah, it's going to be somewhat comparable. But will still be less because part of it, assuming we don't transition away from the insourcing piece, now we've got one chunk of this which is sort of off the outsourcing table, so to speak. So it would end up being a smaller amount. It's really hard to predict what those ultimate costs would be. It really depends on when we actually would sever the relationship and where we're at.
All right, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Otto, thank you very, very much for your presentation. What goes around comes around. So in 2000, the only people on the council who are still here were Council President Johnson and myself. The Unisys contract was pretty controversial. I think it passed on a 8-5 vote. Someone can check that. And Barb and I were both no votes. So here we are today. Could potentially be in an I told you so mode because exactly what we thought was the concern at that time was the concern. And I think that's what a number of people here are thinking about, and that is how do you get the best service from someone who isn't working within your organization, and how motivated are they to provide the best service for the lowest price when they're outside your organization as a private company trying to make money? And are they trying to provide the best service for police, fire, public works, et cetera? Or are they just simply in it to make money and we're just another contract? I think this has answered itself over time. My question has to do with the 33 people we're going to be hiring. So I know, as someone who's chairing the city's community development committee, that our unemployment rate is at about 3.3%. And it's very hard to hire people in this economy. And I would guess that tech jobs probably command high salaries. So I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about your strategy for hiring these 33 people and how we'll be able to do it within our budget, because my biggest concern in 2000 was having really qualified people on site to help our workforce, which is increasingly more tech savvy, certainly wasn't at that time, and how we can do it at a competitive salary.
Chair Johnson, Councilmember Goodman. Most definitely. I mean, we've experienced challenges in hiring IT staff, but then again, the IT staff that we are trying to hire are folks with a lot of expertise. And they are few and far between, in high demand, and so hence the challenges. We have a couple of things working for us. First of all, these jobs are in the lower skill sets, and there are just literally more people out there with these types of skills. We also have found that the aura of IT jobs has spread to various organizations, like what's happening with this IT Ready job program that's been set up, and there are a number of those out there that are put in place to give extensive training and to get people the necessary skills and expertise for these lower skilled IT positions. And so we found that there are some engines out there generating these people out there. The third thing that we have found that to our advantage is when you look at the salary scales that we have on our jobs, and we do have these lower positions, we're actually in a much better position in those lower positions. Now, that was historically done before me. I don't know why that happened. But we're much more competitive at the lower levels, skill-wise, than we are at those positions at the high levels. And so I really think we're in a good position, number one, to tap into a much larger segment. I also think that segment is much larger represented by persons of color. And so that will also help with our racial equity goals as well. An interesting statistics that I've, seen corroborated is particularly at the lower levels, but just in IT in general, there is a shift going on that people of color are going into that field far more than whites across not only the United States, but the world. The world figures 65% of those people in school now trying to get these jobs at all levels are Asian. And so there's a dramatic shift going on with the talent pool that's going in there. And I think we're just in a really good position to be able to find and hire these people at this level. Now, if these were all high-level jobs, I'd have a much different opinion about it. But I think we're going to be in a good position.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Dahl, well, a lower level high-tech person is still much higher level than my level. So I think we have to keep the perspective about what a lower level technology person knows compared to, I won't compare all of the rest of you to me, but to someone like me who has, moderate skills. I mean, I'm at the point where I call on my 19-year-old son to help me understand how to use my iPad. And he knows a lot more about it than me. So I think it's an opportunity for us in terms of hiring to bring on some young people who are much more diverse than the workforce we currently have. I was just wondering if we could actually do it. It sounds like you have some level of confidence.
I have confidence.
Thank you.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Dahl, and Mr. Chair. Thank you for all of your work on this. I know this has been a huge project and it's been a long time coming. I do have a couple of questions and they're along the same themes as some of my colleagues. One is, I think Councilmember Fry was talking a little bit about technology refresh, and I think that I see that on your spreadsheet under the other city managed costs for the future. Have we taken into account the lack of purchasing power that we would have as our own city? I mean, we have much less purchasing power than somebody like a contract through Unisys who's purchasing largely Dell equipment when you're talking about PCs, but other kinds of things. Can you comment on that? How did you come up with the figures that you see here?
Chair Johnson, Council Member Palmisano, we make use of today when we do buy other technologies outside of what we do through Unisys, through various purchasing consortiums. One of our advantages as a public sector entity is we can take advantage of other public sectors purchasing power, like the state, like the Western, it's called WISCA, I'm trying to remember what that acronym stands for, but the WISCA Purchasing Pact, and there are a number of others across the country. And those give us the sort of, because you're right, we as an entity ourselves, we will never buy enough PCs to really drive a very low price unless we can go through some consortium like that. And so we will take advantage of those consortiums to get equipment like we do in other technologies that we have to purchase directly ourselves.
Thank you. A couple other questions, if that's all right. From the perspective of this transition money and having $7 million more to spend on this than we originally thought last November, I see it's coming from the Internal Services Fund. Can you comment as to how did we get that balance that high? I mean, it said, I think in the paper, that it was about charges that we've charged other departments for services, but can you, or Ms. Christensen, can you comment on that?
Thank you, Chair Johnson, Councilmember Palmisano. In order to answer that question, I take you back a little bit into the budget process for 2015, in which we discussed that the city was coming off of a period having resolved some financial challenges as it related to the city's internal service funds. And we were able to basically put to bed those internal service fund challenges 4 years earlier than our original plan, due to activities taken through transfers from the general fund to make those funds a little more fluid. And at the same time, we've been more rigorous in adjusting the city's internal cost allocation methodology to ensure that we're fully capturing the costs associated with providing those services. So 2 years ago, we were providing 100% funding associated with the cost of providing the IT services, which in large part also allowed us to finish those, what I call workout plans earlier. So there has been a planful increase in the fund balance in the intergovernmental services funds, as well as the other internal services funds, partially for the purpose of these types of activities, as well as to provide flexibility for future obligations that may come down the pipeline. So this is not intended or not expected to cause any pain and suffering for that fund, and we anticipate that it will continue to replenish itself through the rigorous cost allocation that we do employ in the city.
Thank you. That was helpful. The last question I have is, right now we have a vendor for this, and I'm wondering, how will we hold our own IT department accountable for the desktop services and things that we offer? I mean, we can cancel a contract with a vendor. We can renegotiate a contract usually, but from the service desk and desktop services perspective, cognizant of the things that you've said that are very encouraging about the salary structure of these level of positions and the opportunity to get a lot more diversity in our hiring force, how will we internally hold this desktop services group accountable?
Chair Johnson, Councilmember Palmisano, good question. First of all, we will have service level agreements and targets for performance. Second of all, we do survey the employee base in the city, about not only IT services, but other enterprise services. And I think that's an excellent vehicle because ultimately, if we're not satisfying the needs of the departments and their employee base, then we're not doing a sufficient job. I believe that ultimately was a decision made back in the late 1990s when the city decided to outsource, a much broader, all of this outsourcing. There were people in the city doing the job. I mean, there was no outsourcing prior to 2003. And so, we can be, if you will, fired too as an organization, not just in these two functions, but really any function that we do. So I take seriously whether or not we're meeting the needs of the city and whether or not the service levels that we establish. And by the way, we do have service levels process that we've been implementing, a much more detailed service level process across the departments. We haven't gotten through all of them. We've gotten through the big departments to date, where we turn around and review on a monthly basis with the departments where we stand against those service levels. So we have positioned ourselves to be able to have hopefully the visibility and the transparency that our client base demands. And that's only fair, and that's the nature of being a service organization. So most definitely it's on my radar. I am very sensitive to what people feel is the level of quality that they're getting. Are they getting their money's worth? Are they able to meet their needs when technology is a piece of that? And so obviously, we internally use a lot of those measures, plus a whole slew of other operational measures, just to manage and make our internal decisions. But ultimately, it's those service levels and those outward opinions that we hear from our client base that really will inform us as to whether or not we're doing a good job or not.
Thank you.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dahl, if you would go to page 13 then on the insourcing structure. I'm just curious, in these different 4 categories of employees that we'll be bringing in, what would be the educational level that you would expect in these individual categories?
Got it. Chair Johnson, Councilmember Johnson, we will have a variety of positions, of course, from supervisors through more senior to less senior people. Some of the positions were at the lower levels. We're looking for education and experience, minimal experience, on up to people with degrees, preferably in computer science, but not necessarily. Again, because of being in the lower skill levels, what we're looking for is our people's ability to deal with people, to be able to communicate, whether written or verbally. There's a lot of importance on soft skills as well as technical skills as well. And so this is not the traditional level that we typically go after. I mean, for the positions we have today, we are typically looking after people that have some IT degree, preferably computer science, and have 5, 6, 10 years worth of experience. And that is not the case with these positions. So what's important to us is, problem determination skills and, like I said, the communication skills, et cetera, depending on whether it's the service desk versus the desktop side. The amount of education that's necessary to understand and deal with a PC is a lot different than a server, which is being managed back in the data center by OneNeck and my senior architects and designers. So, the people that we're going to need are not going to need the extensive education that we're typically looking for. But it is, I want to accent, it's really important on the soft skills. I mean, we throw those in on the other positions as well, but for these, they're our front line, they're our touch points with the client base, and their ability to react, to be able to understand, do assessment, just outright problem determination is really key and important at this level.
Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Dahl, that makes me a little nervous. Let me just say, how do you determine someone's skills, then a skill level that would be able to do this kind of work? Is there testing, or how do you, and I appreciate soft skills, but I want them to have the hard skills too, so that they can diagnose, and make changes as necessary. So how do you determine what somebody's skill level is?
Yes, Chair Johnson, Councilmember Johnson. Couple of things. First of all, when we build the position descriptions, we've gone out in the industry looking for what others have, what sort of skill levels people are projecting are needed for, best in class service desk personnel, et cetera, at the various levels that we're looking at. We then turn around and we look for evidence in their history of certifications. They're particularly numerous within these areas, particularly on the desk side support services. Microsoft has a whole series of certifications. We're going to be looking for those because what that shows us is that those people have actually, passed some rigor of that testing. The program I mentioned before, they ensure that, their students get some of those certifications. And so that's part of what we're looking for. Obviously, there is our internal recruitment process that we go through where we assess people's technical skills as well as their soft skills and what have you for the complete package of the individual. But most definitely one of the advantages we have with these positions is there's a lot of certifications. It's not just, okay, this person got a degree in computer science. For these people to be marketable and to really have the experience, getting that A+ certification or what have you, there's any number of them out there, is really telltale of them understanding what they need to know technically. But we're still going to verify within our hiring process that we have a comfort level that they have that. The final piece, though, is also, as you know, when somebody comes on employee with the city, they're on probation. And so they still got to perform. And so that's, ultimately we would like to not have to, pull somebody off. It has happened in the past. It will probably happen in the future as well. So I think we have enough safeguards to ensure that ultimately we can get this. And to piggyback off a comment that Councilmember Goodman had, I'm very sensitive to whether or not I'm meeting anybody and everybody's needs. Okay, and if I'm not putting the right people with the right skill sets out there to get the job done, I'm sure I'm going to hear about it. And I would hope to hear about it because that's not my intent. I want everybody to feel that they're getting what they need when they need it at a price point that they hopefully are being reasonable about, but nonetheless agree with, and we'll go from there. Because again, I'm in a service business and you want happy customers.
Thank you.
Seeing no one else in queue, I'm going to go ahead and move this item forward, move approval of the RCA for the IT outsourcing contracts, which includes authorizing execution of a contract with OneNeck, increasing our contract with Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, and Pittman, executing all necessary documents for transferring assets, and approving a resolution amending the 2015 budget. Do we have any discussion? I definitely want to say thank you to staff and everybody that's been involved in this. It's been amazing how rigorous and thorough and detailed this has been. What a just incredible examination of all opportunities, and as well when we look at things like insourcing, a skepticism and saying, well, why would we move away from a vendor that's currently doing this? And could we really provide this for less? And it's just been a really impressive process. And I greatly appreciate it. It's not every day you have an opportunity to save taxpayers money, improve internal services, and insource jobs. And that's a high bar. And that's what has been really set, and that I feel confident, especially in our being able to achieve. So thank you. With no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye. 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 All those opposed? All those abstain? The motion carries. Thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to Council Vice President Glidden.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. And I would just like to note that we have been joined by all council members, and with one exception, as Councilmember Reich is attending a settlement conference on behalf of the city. So I just wanted to note that for all. We have one additional item, which was an addition to the agenda. So there is a printed resolution on the dais in front of you. It is authored by myself and Councilmember Warsami. We were not able to be joined by IGR staff today, but our IGR staff did help prepare this. This was really a follow-up to discussion that happened in our IGR committee earlier in the cycle about remittances. And as, hang on just a moment here, as some may know, we have seen now decline, and now I think we have had the last bank, federally authorized bank that was servicing remittances has announced that it has discontinued doing so. Our discussion in IGR was about work primarily by Congressman Ellison, but by others, on finding a solution to remittances and addressing what is really a crisis for our community here in Minnesota, of many people who have relatives, friends, and family members in Somalia, and now are unable to have that connection to be able to send money to family members and others who need their support. And so this resolution, we actually have a position right now in the city on our federal agenda that supports continuing remittances to Somalia and the Horn of Africa. This resolution really is to reaffirm that position, and it includes some resolution clauses. One is that we strongly urge all concerned parties to find an amicable solution that facilitates the normal flow of remittances without compromising the safety and security of the United States. And the second resolved clause is really a staff direction that staff from the Intergovernmental Relations Department, City Attorney's Office, and the Finance Department will review state and local city options for banks to continue servicing of remittances. And we have that not because we know there really is such an option, but we know the community deserves a full examination of whether there are those options, and for us to have that information more formally reviewed and report back on that. So that is the resolution, and I will go ahead and move it, and I'd like to see if there's any discussion on this resolution. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I just want to thank you and Councilmember Warsami for bringing this forward. This is a very important issue for many of my constituents, so I'm really glad to see us supporting this.
Anyone else? Seeing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? And that item is approved. Next, we have reports of committees, with the first Community Development and Regulatory Services. With that chair, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. We have 15 items in front of us for approval tomorrow. Items number 1 and 2 are land sales. Item 3 is the regular liquor business and gambling license applications. Item 4 is operating conditions for a business license, as is item 5 and 6. Item 7 and 8 are reinstatement of rental licenses. Item 9 is authorizing an extension of the maturity date for an existing loan for Tubman Center West. Item 10 is authorizing a contract with Hennepin County with regards to MFIP. Item 11 is a contract amendment with the Home Ownership Center for programs that we work on with them. Item 12 is authorizing the execution of contracts for $330,000 in contracts for Great Streets Facade Improvement Program. Item 13 is an administrative action staff needs to take to utilize our tax-exempt revenue bond financing. Item 14 is accepting money and reallocating it to the home program with Gimmick. And item number 15 is issuing an RFP for almost a little over $1 million in HOPWA funding, which is housing for persons with AIDS, and issuing an RFP for projects to utilize that funding. I'm happy to answer questions on items 1 through 15.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Next, we have health, environment, and community engagement with Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. There's only one item coming from our committee this round, and that's authorizing the application to the Bush Foundation for a grant up to $50,000 to support the city's 3rd annual Community Connections Conference.
All right, thank you for that report. Next, we have the Ways and Means, the Intergovernmental Relations Report. And we had 4 items on the agenda. The first was authorizing some comments relating to the A-Mill Artists Loft. The second was updating our legislative policy position to add a position on housing warranties. We also approved an amendment to our existing policy, which was on paid sick time, to update that to earned sick and safe time. And I'll just note we had a proposed resolution that needed to be just updated a little bit, and we'll bring that forward on Friday. That would be in support of the earned sick and safe time. And then we authorized becoming a formal endorsing organization of the Minnesota Homes for All Coalition. And those are the items. Next, we have Transportation and Public Works. With that committee's Vice Chair, Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you. Transportation and Public Works Committee has 10 items to submit for approval. The first is the 34th Avenue South and 43rd Street East Street Resurfacing Project. We have the 38th Street East Street Reconstruction Project's layout. The Nawadaha Boulevard and Minnehaha Avenue parking restrictions. This was simply required to meet rules for receiving state aid money. Most interesting was the University of Minnesota Tree Failure Study report following the windstorm from June 2013. That was really informative, and we look forward to working with the Park Board more on that in the future. We have the Minnehaha Avenue Street Reconstruction Agreement and restrictions. That's also related to number 3. We have water main work. This is about renovation of the Franklin Avenue Bridge. Number 7 is Hennepin County Public Space Recycling Grants, accepting and redeploying that amount of money. 8 is the 10th Avenue Southeast Storm Tunnel Reconstruction and Rehab Project. We're increasing the amount of the contract due to site conditions found before we started work on it. We have the Sabo Bridge ownership authorization, and we have 2 bids to accept: a low bid for concrete about the ADA pedestrian intersection ramps, and a low bid to ADS for closed circuit inspection of our storm drain system.
All right, thank you for that report. Next, we have Ways and Means with Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Ways and Means has 12 items for your consideration on Friday. First are a series of 5 legal settlements. The second item is the authorizing appropriate officials to enter into a contract with Minneapolis Downtown Council for the budgeted amount of $400,000 for the downtown activation program. The items 3 and 4 are accepting donations for broadcast airtime from Comcast and billboard display time donations from Clear Channel. There are 2 items from the Convention Center we're talking about the escalator replacement project and the convention center fabric removal projects. There's also an item number 7 on the Target Center Arena ice floor. Item number 8 is the fire station re-roofing project for one fire station and 2 fire stations and a police precinct. The items 9, 10, and 11 are from our information technology department, and they include the photo imaging system agreement for Minneapolis Police Department, as well as their fingerprint system, and then continuing work, an extension of a contract for the Enterprise Resource Planning Program. And the final item is authorizing a grant agreement with Minnesota Homeland Security and Emergency Management for the bomb disposal unit. Happy to answer questions on those 12 items.
All right, thank you very much. And last, we have zoning and planning with Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 4 items to forward from zoning and planning. The first is 3 planning commission reappointments. These are mayoral appointments that need our approval, and these are all reappointments. Item number 2 is approving an application for the Hiawatha College Prep for a temporary operation of a high school there, which would expire in 2018. Item number 3 is passage of a resolution approving an application for a no-outlet alley at 300 2nd Street South. And item number 4 is commemorative street renaming for 3 streets submitted by Councilmember Warsami. And I will forward all 4 items for approval.
All right, well, thank you very much. I do not believe that we have any announcements, and so with that, we have concluded with our agenda, and we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Hi.